Hi. Who is a news anchor? And why do we love them? And why do we hate them? I want to provide some perspective today on this very well-known term called anchor. Anchors are the face of a news channel, but also the most verbally abused of all media persons. Let's think about why that is. That we will spend the next few minutes talking about that. Anchors have two very different roles to play. One is their brand value. They're the most important brand on which channels rely for viewership and therefore revenues. So because they're a brand, they build public trust, and the public trust in the for the whole channel. So by the same token, brand value can be very tricky, because if you're a human person, a human being, and you are the brand, the pressure and the knowledge that you are a brand can distract you from the primary function, which is actually this second function that I'll talk about, which is called the operational value. Right? The operational value is that they must moderate divergent views. Most anchors today are also editors, and they get to choose what they sometimes, who also, but definitely what goes into their show. But anchors get abused very unfairly sometimes, because sometimes we do not understand what their functions actually are, what their role really is. What do we expect from them? Is that the same thing as what their role is? There was a time when news anchors did not exist in India. In fact, in the US, they have existed almost ever since television took birth, but even before in radio with Ed Murrow in the 1940s, and then Walter Cronkite, 60s through about 80s. And then Dan Rather and the others followed in the 90s and 2000s. They're critical, they're incisive, they're very popular. They have always found controversy along the way. They will always bring controversy, they'll drag in controversy. By virtue of being that way, there is no, that visibility lends to the controversy. But in India, by the late 1990s, there was a concept called channel driver. In entertainment. Channel drivers were, for example, a show like Kaun Banega Crorepati was a channel driver for the channel. And which means that they brought in a lot of revenue. Their investment would be very heavy. News channels borrowed from that concept seemingly, because they then started heavily depending on brands, human brands, these anchors. They're high-profile anchors, highly sought-after, highly visible people who would be highly promoted, and that, you know, because they're already seasoned, usually, as they would have built up a certain personal trust as maybe reporters or something. The chances that they will bring trust with them into those shows is very high. So trust, you know, you'll notice that I'm constantly talking about trust, which is the pivot on which anchors also play. That's why I was saying that the conscious awareness that the whole channel depends on that trust can be a little tricky for them. That trust can be segmented, and there's no problem with that today. There is no false sense of balance that comes into play when you talk about anchored shows. They can exploit these segments of audiences. Even if those segments are politically affiliated, you can make your show politically slanted to address those segments. Within that, can you bring fairness? There's no pretense about whom some anchors will support. And that is absolutely fine, because as viewers, we already know their stand. And when we are watching them, therefore, we are watching them for that particular slant. Now, another thing has happened in the meantime with the growth of the internet and social media. These shows, anchored shows, have also grown, been increasingly becoming independent. There's a show by Karan Thapar, for example, the famous BBC person. He has a show on YouTube. His show does not belong to a news channel. It is affiliated to a news portal. So it is possible that we will see a lot of such shows by independent anchors or anchors who become independent of channels and launch their own shows as social media becomes more and more prevalent in our lives. And news anchors don't read the news. They will probably just skim over the news, but their job is to pick a topic and then dig deeper into it. That would take research of hours and hours together. But more importantly, it takes a lot of understanding and years of understanding inside stories. And they rely on sources. Sometimes those sources can be official sources themselves. But this is typically the way that anchors operate, typically how reporters would also operate. But like I said, anchors operate more autonomously now than ever before. There are also, debates need that spontaneity, not depend on, dry facts only. They will, their, production teams sometimes are not able to provide online facts quickly on the go when they're live. And there is, therefore, with that very little backup, anchors must depend on their own experience and their own knowledge. And sometimes they get it wrong. When guests get it wrong, that we've seen this often, that information goes uncorrected on air. Wrong statistics being provided, they go unnoticed. And those guests can play on that. Remember the time that I still remember, the computer chip in currency notes scandal, which some of the anchors got wrong. And you start wondering who fed them that fake news? With what intention did they feed it? And because we trust the anchors, we will not question it for a while until it is actually proven wrong. Another characteristic of anchoring today is how they present themselves. Anchors are often eccentric in the way that they, Walter Cronkite's sign-off was very popular, and that's the way it is. Similarly, you will find an Arnab Goswami or a Ravish Kumar or a Rajdeep Sardesai, the most popular of anchors, having their own styles, having their own ways of being aggressive, speaking loudly. They're all targeting our emotions. And in particular, you will notice that anger is the most favorite target. Whether it's political discourse or media discourse, anger works very well because sometimes anger as an emotion brings about action. And you can hope that that action is social action for change. So when anchors choose their topics for discussion, they normally understand what touched us in that entire flood of news stories that came in that day. What would touch us the most? What sets the public agenda? And that agenda setting role of an anchor is one of the most important ones because they're setting the agenda for the society. And vice versa. The society is setting the agenda for them through social media, etc. The anchor already knows what's the popular news of the day. And this agenda can be chosen in using that slant or using that bias that goes with the kind of segmented audience that an anchor has. So when a topic can actually deflect from the main news of the day rather than actually delving deep into them, depending on who the anchor is actually supporting. Whether that's right or wrong is up to us to decide. But within that framework, is the anchor asking the right questions? What is the most important role within that operational role or value that we were talking about? It is to ask the right questions. If the anchor shouts down one particular panelist, it shows bias. It shows the kind of bias within the framework of slant that is not acceptable. If the anchor doesn't ask obvious questions, if the anchor does not sum up the arguments very well. That's not an ideal anchor for us to pursue. That is how, within our biases, an anchor can be a good anchor or a bad anchor. Lastly, let's think about why we watch a particular anchored show. What is it that we are trying to derive? What is our use out of that? What is our gratification? Whether we are there because we want to hear this free marketplace of ideas. Usually a free marketplace of ideas is also a free for all marketplace of ideas, where the loudest voice gets the prize. Can we think of another term like a fair marketplace of ideas, where fair is fair to all? There are no prizes to be won, because this is not a debate with prizes, it's not a school debate. So what are we actually looking for? Are we looking for fairness, facts, truths? Are we open to that? Are we watching it for the drama? Or are we watching it because they strengthen our belief, our existing belief, and those beliefs have been cultivated over time? There is no right or wrong answer, and there is certainly, every answer is valid. But it's a point that makes us think about why anchors are the way they are. Thank you.